Hello, world history students. So today, my goal is to walk you through what the expectations are on our map assignments when we're in the virtual classroom. So you have been assigned an assignment on Chinese geography. And so what we have here is when you open this assignment, you'll find a couple slides. The first slide is the directions. The second slide is the actual map I want you to work with. And these maps, you'll notice, are blank. One of the big things in learning how to interact with maps is being able to see a map and identify features and be able to know how these different features are relating to each other. And so one of the things that you'll see in most of our units is an activity of a blank map of that region, expecting you to be able to identify those places. And by the end of the semester, you'll find a lot of places repeat themselves and you become more familiar with these globally important places. Part of this as well is just we need to know where these features are, so it makes sense when we talk about how those features impact civilizations. But the main goal today is just walking you through how to actually complete this assignment. And I'm actually going to fully do this one with you. So if you follow along step by step with me, you should have a fully complete assignment by the time we are finished with this video. So the first step on the directions is giving you resources. And of course, you have access to tons of resources. If you have access to maps and you find those easier, by all means use those. There are some of these assignments that are unique to certain time periods, but physical features don't change much over the course of the centuries. And so if you find a map today and you're finding the features you need to find, you will still be okay on those. The only time you really need to worry about using a dated map is when you're tracing borders of a country or something like that that moves frequently. But if you don't have another map you want to use, I did give you the link to the textbook. So if you click on this link, it's going to directly take you to the chapter on India and China in the textbook. And it says to use page 92, so you cannot use this search function. You actually do need to look at the page numbers. So you can see this chapter starts on page 90, but we need page 92, and there's a map of Asia. So there are two ways you can approach this. If you have a double screen, you can of course go back and forth. You can open it on your phone on one screen and use it on the computer for the other. You can just minimize your tabs and place them side by side like this also. Doing so is a little harder to work because you're losing space, but that does work if you want to have them both on the same screen. One of the first things we need to figure out is where do the borders of this map line up with the map in the textbook? And so to do that, we need to look for the really obvious features. And so if we look at the center of the map in the assignment, we see this big round shape of the coast of China. And if we find that, when we look on this map, we should be able to identify that same round shape this way. I'm going to bring up my arrows. So we should be able to see this same round shape over here that we're also seeing over here. If you're having any doubts, you can also see the islands over here, which you can match up this way also. So we know that this part of the map is all what we're working with. We just know there's too much somewhere else. And so that's where we can use the body of water. And over on the map we're using, we see one body of water that kind of goes up and it starts to go down a little bit. And so if we follow that same curve, we can see there's the same land. And here's where that water starts to go up and down a little bit. And we don't want to follow it all the way to India. So what we know is this line right here is as far as this map is going to go. So if we find anything to the left side of where my arrow is currently moving, we know that that's not a part of this assignment right now. We have the same thing on the top. So we can see it kind of cuts off above this peninsula that I'm pointing to. And so again, we'll do the same thing and we'll just say we're not dealing with anything that's on the top of the map and there's not much there anyway. So I'm going to assume that you can look at this map and zoom in and be able to start to find some of the features. So as you start to look at this map and compare this to what you have to do, there we go. Now we can say, okay, I need to find the Yellow River. When we find the Yellow River, we look around, we of course look for these little blue lines, and we'll find that this one is labeled Yellow River. Again, we have the Chang River. And so what we're trying to do is find these places on the map, and then we're going to bring them and show that you found them by actually completing the map on the second slide. So I wanted to show you some of the features to do that. So I'm going to bring this back to full screen. So as we are working through these features, there are a couple of functions that you need to use, and really only a few functions you need to use. So again, let's use my little magical glowing dot now. This that I'm currently hovering over right now is a text box. So that's going to be how we label. It is never okay just to mark a place. We need to know exactly what you are trying to label. And we'll show you a couple ways you can do that. So we're really going to use that text box function a lot. We're going to use the shape function quite a bit. And from there, we can create arrows that we can type inside of. We can also create shapes. So if we've got a bigger area, we can also create a shape and type inside of that. What we're going to use most of all, I believe, is going to be in these lines. And when you're getting into the lines, you're going to want to go to the scribble for almost all of them. That allows you to draw exactly where you want to go. If you start trying to do some of these other options with the connectors or even the curves, it's going to curve your line for you, and you're going to leave behind the areas that you're actually trying to do. So scribble is actually going to be your best option here as we're working forward. And really that's it. We're using text box, we're using shape, we're using lines. And that should be everything we need to do to be able to complete this map. So as we were looking through, I'm going to go ahead and go to scribble. And as I go to scribble, let's get rid of that spotlight feature. So as I go to the scribble, there we go. I can now draw the line I need to draw. If I can figure out how to turn this thing off. There we go. Now it'll let me draw. So when I see this light up, that means it's trying to move the map, and we don't want it to do that. And you will find that from time to time. There, now I have my little cross, and I'm going to start where my river ends, because that's the easier marker to find, right there where it runs into the sea. And I just hold my mouse button and I draw right along the entire river. On these assignments, I do expect that you are tracing the entirety of the river, not just a piece of it. So there's our river. Now that's kind of hard to see, so we can go up to these functions. I'm going to change it into a blue line since it's a river. You should change it to something so it stands out. And just to make it more obvious, I'm going to make it bigger. So 1 point is what we're looking at here. I'm going to bring it up to 4. So it's nice and thick, and it's very obvious that's that river. While I'm in scribble mode, I'm going to go ahead and scribble again and go ahead and put in our next river. So as we scribble this one down, again, I'm trying to trace as closely as I can. It does not need to be absolutely perfect. You'll see that mine are not, but it needs to be really clear that you know which river you're talking about. And in this case, since I did it right away, you'll notice it saved it in that blue color and those settings. So the next step we need to do is label it. And there's a couple ways you can do this. So now we're going to go to the text box. As I go to that text box, I can open up the box and I can just type right next to it, Yellow River. Again, you can change the fonts. You can make it larger or smaller the same way you would in a Google Doc. I'm going to make it smaller just so it fits in one line. Another way that you may choose to do this would be I can make a key. And so if I say, well, this river is 2. Now in that case, I don't know what 2 means. So when I'm going back, you need to tell me that. So that's what this key is for. So I can just put 2 equals the Chang River. So I would suggest choose one of these, use those as your main method of labeling. The other option you may choose to do would be use the arrows. So I can do an arrow and I can draw the arrow. It's going to point straight at the river, and I can type directly into that also. Again, it was a little bigger than my arrow, so I can just bring it back down, make it a little bit smaller. And once again, it's very obvious that that is my Yellow River. In fact, I prefer that one, so I'm going to get rid of my text box and just leave the arrow for one and the key for the other. So now we have our rivers labeled. The next step we need to do, if we look back to the main screen, is label the Gobi Desert. So as we start to look over the Gobi Desert, we want to find another way to show this wide area. So I would recommend we find a shape. And in this case, the Gobi Desert is going to be kind of a rectangle shape for what we have. And so as you're comparing that, we're going to just lay it right on top of this. I do want to point out, we just covered up the Yellow River. So we do need to move that, because if we cover up a label, it doesn't count as a label. The other thing we could do here is change some of the functions of this and make this transparent, which I hope we can do through a right click. So if we format this differently, we should be able to make it where we can see through it. And sorry, I'm not as familiar with covering up with those shapes. So we will figure that out and come back. So to make the shape invisible, the box is actually over here right next to the other buttons we were just using. So we click fill color and we want to make it transparent so that we can see the river. We see that the Yellow River does run through the Gobi Desert, which is actually where a lot of that yellow color of the river comes from. I'm going to change the color just to make it obvious that I'm not dealing with a river right now. And we're going to, again, thicken that line, make it very obvious where the line is. So once again, now that I have that shape, I can type directly into it and I can just call this the Gobi Desert. And we know that this shape is the Gobi Desert that we're looking at. I don't know what that one is. So we've got a weird extra piece. We're going to leave that there for now. So now we have our Gobi Desert labeled. We also need the Himalayan mountains. A lot of times we do mountains, and one of the universal symbols that we can go with is just some of these up and down looking caret symbols. I'm sorry, I'm deleting all over the place. Control Z is your magical undo button. So if you make a mistake, Control Z will undo the last mistake you did, which will make this a whole lot easier and less frustrating if you know about that. So then we make our Himalayan mountains. And once again, we want to make that different. We want to make it very clear that that's different from the other one. So we're going to make them purple today. And once again, I need to label them. So we can use any of those options that we chose. I'm going to decide right now to go ahead and do another arrow. So as I point an arrow, we can point it right at the Himalayas. And we just type Himalaya Mountains. Resize it so it'll fit. Again, I would grab the wrong thing and I have to hit Control Z. Move it to where I can read it. And now I have my Himalayan mountains labeled. You'll notice the plateau is also there. So the plateau, I'm going to leave as a shape. And again, you have a lot of flexibility. You can do more drawing, less drawing, more shapes. That is your personal preference. The Plateau of Tibet is largely right here. And if you're not familiar with the plateau, it's basically an area of high elevation that is flat. So once again, we're going to make this transparent. We're going to thicken that line up a whole lot. And we're going to write in there that that's the Plateau of Tibet. So then we can go back, we can continue to check through. We have the Pacific Ocean is next on our list. So of course, what you're gonna see on that textbook map is there's a lot of smaller seas. For our purposes today, we can just say all of that's the Pacific Ocean. So I'm just gonna drop a text box right in the middle of the ocean and call it the Pacific Ocean. From there, let's see what's next. We can go over here. We need to find Japan and Korea. And this, the instructions on the right side, you will probably need to go through and use a different map if you're not familiar with these places. So these are, again, reference points. So when you're hearing about Japan and Korea in the news, on a modern day event, if we're talking about them in other contexts of world history, we want you to know, hey, they're on that same map that we had. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and do a shape here. So we'll do a couple arrows. This time I'm facing the other way. So if you know this, great. If not, we're still going to add that correctly. So that's Korea. Since all we're doing is covering ocean right now, we don't need to worry about making that transparent. You can if you prefer. There's a lot of personal taste you can choose to include on this. And we're going to do a different arrow to show Japan. So there's Japan, and now those are labeled as well. Now we need to find cities. One of the keys anytime you're doing maps with me is you need a dot and a label on those cities. So we can see I need the city of Xi'an. Some maps will call that Chang'an. I also need to label Beijing. So this is where we're going to want to potentially insert a small shape instead of a dot. So in this case, we're just going to make a really small dot right there. So that one's going to be Xi'an. Now that one's a little bit small. So since I made that dot, I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to make it a real bright color so I can see it. This is where you would want to use an arrow, or once again, you can click on it, type the key, and on this particular text box, we can just add to it. And now we can have, well, 3 equals Xi'an. And we'll go ahead and decide right now, 4 is going to be Beijing, but we still need to put that on the map. So then we need another one. So sometimes you might want to make a start one. Sometimes you have a lot of cities. So what I like to do sometimes is just copy and paste. So if I highlight that dot, I can make all my dots the same. I can right click and copy and paste. Shortcuts would be Control C, and then I Control V. It's going to put another one right next to it. And I just move that right up to where Beijing is going to be. Now, of course, I do need to change the number. So I'm going to delete that 3. Oops, wrong delete. So I'm going to delete the 3, make it a 4 if I can. And of course, it's not cooperating while I'm trying to demonstrate this. So that's not working as well as I hoped it would. So we're just going to go ahead and make ourselves another shape. Put it right there, and we will label this one as 4. So now we have our dots here for our cities. The next thing on our list to complete was we need the Silk Road, start and end points. And so in this particular map, we're now going to have to use the scribble. We are going to use the city of Xi'an as our start point for our purposes in this class. So if we start our Silk Road in Xi'an, what a lot of times people will do is they'll just make a line, and they'll take that line from wherever in China they start and they'll send it to wherever they feel like it should end up. That doesn't work. For example, if I am trading, if I've got a big caravan or some wagons, I can't go through the plateau of Tibet with my wagon and my animals. I'm going to have to go around that, but I also want to spend as little bit of time in the desert as I can. So we're going to actually have to take that Silk Road and take it above the plateau of Tibet, but as close to under the Gobi Desert as we can. And then the other key we need to know about the Silk Road is it's going to end either in Istanbul or the Mediterranean Sea. Neither of those are on the map, so we want to take that all the way off the edge to say, yes, you know, this is significantly bigger than what it looks like on this map. So once again, I'm going to add some color. I'm going to make it a little thicker for us to see. And now we need to label this one also as the Silk Road. So I believe we are almost finished. So start and end points. If you're on a bigger scale map, you'll need to know the endpoint of either Istanbul or the Mediterranean Sea. And we'll practice that when we get to those also. The last piece on this map is the Grand Canal. And that's one that we will be talking about in our government section of China. So the Grand Canal, the main thing that I look for when I'm grading a map is it needs to connect the Yellow River and the Chang River. Now, what we discussed in class is it actually does that by connecting all these small bodies of water. And so that's the easy way to show that you understand the Grand Canal is we're going to connect the Yellow River to the Chang River, but we're going to do it by drawing a line to connect all these smaller dots of water, which is actually going to help us make sure that we got it in the right place, since that's where the Chinese actually put it. And I'm just going to make that one yellow for no apparent reason other than to be different. So now I have the Grand Canal. And once again, I need to give that a label. Looking at it now, it's probably better off as an arrow so that it's really obvious on what that line is for. So I'm going to switch that to an arrow because we want to make sure when we're grading it that we're not going to get confused. Because remember, you'll be studying from this later. And so you don't want to have to worry, is that pointing to the river? Is that pointing to the coastline? What is that pointing to? You want to make sure that you have that known and correct, because you're essentially making yourself a study guide as we're going through this process of creating also. So there we have it, a complete map with everything. A couple things I would like you to notice: they are easy to read. The locations are in the correct place. As you get more and more practice at this, I promise these get easier. Maps are often a challenge for students that haven't spent a lot of time working with them. That's normal, that's okay, but the only way to overcome that is to spend more time working with maps and getting more familiar with them. So please take some time, practice playing with these tools. When you get finished, go ahead and submit this to me. If it looks just like mine today, that's great. If you decide to put some creative flair, but as long as everything is still labeled correctly and in the right places, that's great too. There's no special reason on the colors I chose, other than I just wanted them to all look different from each other. As always, if you have any difficulty making this work for you, if you are having any trouble on the assignments, please reach out. Call me, text me, email me. We want you to be super successful, and I'm willing to do what it takes to help you get there. So reach out if you need any help. Until then, take care, and I will see you all soon.